We're looking at the play An Inspector Calls and responding to the question or the statement, this play is all about selfishness. So let me just share the screen while you gather your thoughts about that. The play Inspector Calls is all about selfishness. The reason we're taking this one is that it's a common GCSE exam topic. Here we go. We come in the modern prose or drama sections. Answer one question from this section on your chosen text. And the one we're looking at here is, how does Priestley present selfishness and its effects in An Inspector Calls? Write about examples of selfish behavior in the play and how Priestley presents selfishness and its effects. Think of that last thing, and its effects. So it's not just the cause, but the consequence. So the first part of this essay is very, very simple. You just have to run through the characters in your mind and decide how selfishness is exhibited. Just run. There's only a handful of characters, and each of them in one measure or another produce examples of selfish behavior. Apart from Edna the maid, okay, and apart from Inspector Gould, who really is very significant, but he comes into it in a different way to wrap things up. So Inspector Gould's final speech is absolutely crucial to your essay, but it's going to come at the end. It's going to come at the end. It's going to be the wrap up and showing what selfish behavior produces. Do you remember that speech that I'm referring to when it concludes, if you don't learn this lesson now, then you will learn it in blood. I'm paraphrasing, but you get the general idea. Okay, so let's begin with examples of selfish behavior. So really, this essay kind of writes itself. You start to talk about Mr. Burling, Mrs. Burling, Sheila, Gerald, you just go through the young Mr. Burling. You go run through all those. And I guess we need to exempt Daisy or Eva from our story as well. So it's just the people around that table at the dinner party. How do they exhibit selfish behavior? You could argue that it is Inspector Gould's role as he inspects each one to point to precisely this. And then he wraps up in that final speech and shows what it produces. So this is a great and easy and straightforward exam question, excuse me. So he presents selfishness as a pernicious and a harmful quality that has consequences. Some of it is in the way of, like, you might say, karma. You know, the consequences come upon the person who has exhibited the selfishness. And the Burling family as a whole appear to live in their own bubble. It's a comfort bubble of luxury and wealth and sophistication. They have everything they want. That by itself is not an example of selfishness. It's what you do with what you have. So their bubble inhibits and warps their view of the world. And for example, the very stage directions describe the suburban Burling home as pink and intimate. And even that word pink suggests the idea of rose-tinted spectacles. Everything is rosy, thank you very much. And the sense that they are out of touch with the real world, they're detached from the realities of modern Britain. They are just living in cloud cuckoo land. And the feeling is augmented when the inspector arrives and begins to shatter their rapacious ignorance. The lighting changes and it goes to brighter and harder with the idea of the inspection has begun, the final judgment, you might say. Maybe the lighting is like a police interrogation. You know, when they're going to torture someone, they turn the light on really brightly. And the Burlings begin to look at areas of their own lives that they'd never seen before. perhaps because of the ignorance that was afforded to them by their own greed and selfishness. The selfishness itself becomes a protective screen. I mean, the word itself means that you are absorbed with yourself, selfishness, self-centeredness. And the word harder, in terms of the stage direction of the lighting, connotes that the process of exposing the woes of the poor and the Burling's transgressions was actually grueling for the family. They have gone for years without seeing themselves. It's very uncomfortable, isn't it, when you wake up in the middle of the night and suddenly think of something that you've done and think, when your own character is exposed as less than wonderful. So the Burling's detachment as a result of their selfishness and wealth has led to a level of inhumanity. And this is explored, this is the whole point of the play, is to explore different levels of inhumanity, how carelessly we can shatter and destroy the vulnerable around us without even noticing. Eva Smith's described as a wretched girl. And the word implies pity, not sympathy. And the word girl is demeaning to an adult woman who's just died. Wretched girl. Wow. And throughout the play, and particularly in the final speech, Priestley conveys the feeling that greed and profiteering and capitalism are deeply virulent and subversive things that damage society as a whole. For example, Burling begins the play with an obsession with profits and so forth. And that very point, which is naked capitalism, that's why you're in business, is to make money. Come on, what's wrong with that? I just want to make a bit for myself and my family. And we have worked hard for this. And it becomes a self-perpetuating spiral of selfishness. And that selfishness leads him to dismiss Eva Smith almost without a thought. He barely remembers, oh, yeah, no, that's the one, yeah. Why did you, she wanted more money. Well, I'm not going to give her more money. And that engendered a downward spiral that led to her death. And the inspector declares we're members of one body, which has a oddly biblical ring to it, doesn't it? And it's a metaphor that connotes that people need to work together to survive. Truth is really that the human race is one family, and the way we develop tribalism that we have means you do not have. That's the point that Priestley was getting at. We need to work together to survive, as the body consists of many vital organs and systems that all work together to thrive. The hand cannot say to the eye, I have no need of you. We work together to do stuff. And the implication being that even if one component or one person fails to work as part of the team, then the body, the society, will fail. That's the point of the play. The consequences of a failure to work as a community and instead being selfish and acquisitive are enunciated by that last speech. And the inspector warns of fire and blood and anguish. And it's, again, biblical. It's a prophetic warning, but it's multifaceted. On the one hand, it urges people to work together, lest there be such damage that physical injury or blood, damage and destruction, fire, and deep emotional suffering, anguish take place. But alternatively, it paints the inspector as an almost supernatural figure. This is because to a 1945 audience, such desperate suffering would have been all too apparent. When the play was produced, there was still much of England, especially in the big cities, that were bomb sites, that were leveled and ruined. The extent of the civilian suffering was only being uncovered. And now the news was coming in of even worse suffering across Europe. and the opening of the concentration camps, and the sense of what we do when we put our ideology above that of another race. It was the time for such a play as this. So they've endured the hellish World War II, and most of them would have suffered through World War I, 1914 to 1918, which is being anticipated in this play. Such a prescient warning from the inspector would have instantly done something important, lined the audience with him and against Arthur Burling, who had previously fallen victim to dramatic irony. The Germans don't want war, which makes Burling not just seem thick or insensitive, but pompous, and because of his ignorance, because of his selfish ignorance. Why don't they want war? Because I don't want war, because I want to make money. I want to push forward in what we're doing. Every day, in every way, we're getting better and better. The emphasis on the we, and the emphasis on we being richer and richer. But the inspector is like the voice of Priestley's socialist ideals. And it appears enlightened and popular with the audience. Do you remember, in 1945, there was a massive electoral swing in Britain away from Churchill, who, while being venerated and revered, rightly, as a great hero and great war leader, but there was a significant shift away to a new Labour government that brought in the National Health Service, which in all of its ideals is engendering a kind of unselfish and we can do this together type of attitude, which lingers on just about to our present day. Okay. And finally, think of the description of the different characters. I'm going to leave this with you to look at by yourself now, so that this video isn't too long. But go through the characters and you'll see aspects of selfishness in each one. Think of Arthur Burling. Even think of his gluttony. And for example, the adjective portentous is multifaceted. One interpretation is that he's arrogant and hubristic man who's overly self-important. However, it could be deduced that he's bloated and swollen. Some of the characters who've played him have played him that way, either because of gluttony, even excessive consumption shows somebody who is self-obsessed, just wanting what he wants, eating, taking, drinking what he wants, and brimming with arrogance and vanity. And this portentous comes from the adjective portly, meaning overweight. But go through everyone. Think of Mrs. Burling. Think of her selfishness in the way that she ran and directed the charity. Even think of Sheila, being so conscious about her own appearance and self-image that she's prepared to have a girl who smiles in the shop dismissed. Think of the two guys who both use the woman because of their own ends. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Let's take that as our clarion call to get on with the essay.